A late summer dust storm boils across the New Mexico Territory Badlands. Heat trembles off a bone-white arroyo. A broken mail wagon lists on a snapped axle, while a lone buzzard carves slow circles. In the wash, quicksand gulps a fallen canteen with a soft, wet click. Mara Pike, a widowed schoolteacher turned part-time midwife, staggers beside the wreck, cut off from water, one shoe lost, clutching a swaddled infant she delivered on the trail. She's been abandoned by the ranch heir, who swore to escort her to town after she overheard his plan to pay thugs to teach the boy sheriff a lesson. The only road to safety runs through Calico Ford, where Sheriff Eli Mercer, 23, quiet, haunted, stands between the town and the rancher's men. If Mara reaches him, she may save both his life and her own. If she fails, the storm and the killers will finish the work. At dusk, a rider lifts from the dust like a mirage, bandana black, rifle low, and he is not the savior she prayed for. Before you choose sides, hear what the undertaker scribbled in the ledger margin about the boy sheriff's hands, and why one erased name in the sheriff's sworn deposition changed every death that followed. The rider's horse slid to a stop so near the broken wagon that grit peppered Mara's face. The bandana hid his mouth, but his eyes were hot and bored. The way a man looks at a chore he means to finish fast. He pointed the rifle at the bundle in Mara's arms, not at Mara. "That's the one," he said, and only then did she notice the second rider materialize from the storm, and the third behind him. "Lightfoot," the second called to the first. "Don't scuff it. Ransom wants the show clean." The third laughed, like it cost him pain to do it. Mara tightened her hold until her knuckles ached. The infant stirred under the shawl and let out a thin sound. It wasn't a cry. It was more like he remembered crying and tried to do it again. With no breath to spare, she could run left for the wash and drown in the ground, or right for the open flats and be ridden down. She could plead. That would be worse. "You'll not take a child," she said, and surprised herself by how steady she sounded. The first rider lowered the rifle a finger's width, as if to admire her stance. "Miss," he said, "I take what I'm paid to take. Don't make me bruise you for it." He swung a leg down. She drove her heel at his knee and missed by an inch. His gloved hand struck her cheek with the soft thud of leather. The infant shivered at the impact. She saw, as if the dust thinned for a heartbeat, a boy with a badge practicing alone by the dry river, his hands faster than thought. She had never met him, but the town had a way of saying his name when it mentioned any trouble. Eli Mercer. It came like a prayer and a warning both. A shape moved on the ridge. The third rider's head snapped up. "Company." For an instant, hope flared, then failed. The figure on the ridge was not a lone lawman, but a buzzard lifting and folding its wings. The first rider slipped the infant out of Mara's arms with a gentle motion that made her sick because it was practiced. "There," he said. "See? Clean." He turned and passed the bundle to the second rider, who tucked it under his coat, as if he'd smuggle warmth. "You'll get it back," the first told Mara, after the sheriff learns humility. The lie sat in the dust between them and did not bother to hide. They pulled away at a lope, fanning out, using the wind to erase their own sign. Mara ran after them until the world tilted, and she stumbled to her knees. She thought of water. There was none. She thought of her brother Jonah, hands ink-stained from the undertaker's ledger, and the way he read other people's deaths, like weather. She remembered how he once pressed her wrist, where her pulse jumped, and said, "Quiet, you're steadier than most." She pressed her own wrist now to feel anything steady in her. The dust burned her throat. She stood, tore a strip from her skirt to bind her sole, where the shoe was missing, and set off toward Calico Ford. The storm wanted to close its mouth around her. She walked inside its teeth. The town rose by degrees out of heat shimmer. First the twin cottonwoods on the church lot, then the lean of the River Saloon sign with the E missing so it read, "Saloon River," and then the squat plank office with sheriff burned into a board over the door, as if the word had been held to a fire before it took its place. A bell clapper banged somewhere, not in alarm, but because the wind had its own work to do. Mara felt the weight of the payment chit in her pocket. the small brass seal stamped with a steer skull, and the letter R. She had seen the same seal on a crate of salt beef the day before, when Caleb Ransom stopped his buckboard at the way station and handed out provisions to travelers as if generosity fit him. She had thanked him then. He had tipped his hat and told her, "Calico Ford is safer when folks know who keeps it safe." He had smiled with his mouth and not his eyes. On the riverbank, a young man stood facing a row of bottles set on a fence rail. He wore no gun belt, only a loose coat, and his hat brim cast his face in shade. He raised his right hand, empty. The hand blurred, and the third bottle jumped and spun into the air as if a stone had struck it. He did it again. The fourth bottle rang and fell, unbroken. He did it a third time, and missed on purpose. If the slow amusement in his posture said anything, a gray-haired woman on the far side of the river watched from under a shawl, humming in a way the wind respected. When the woman stopped humming, the wind seemed to hold still, listening for more. The young man felt it too. He half turned, as if embarrassed, as if someone had caught him doing a trick that was not a sin, but lived nearby. Mara staggered toward him and found breath. "Sheriff," she said, and he turned all the way now, and he was as young as the stories said, and maybe younger. His eyes were old. "Heard you coming," he said. His voice was soft. It sounded like a man keeping his sound level for a sleeping horse. "Where's the baby?" she told him. She told him without wasting words. When she finished, he touched his thumb to the inner edge of his left palm, like a prayer he didn't say aloud. "Blue Match Vickers," he said. "I know his touch." The gray-haired woman came nearer. "Eli," she said. "Say the rest." "Tala," he said back, and in that name there was an old tenderness and an older caution. "He works for Ransom. This time, he works for Crowd." Eli's gaze moved to the wind, which had shifted from a boil to a sifting. "They want a stage," he said. "They want me to step on it." Across town, Jonah Pike sat at a rough table under the undertaker's dim window and sharpened his pencil by shaving it with a paring knife he used for everything. He had 3 names to add to the week's tally. One was a trail hand kicked by a mule. One was a drifter whose lungs had given up. One was a boy who had wandered to the river and not come back. Jonah had not written the boy's name yet, because the Reverend had not found the mother to ask what to write. He drew a line where the name should go, and felt the line like grit under his front teeth. In the margin, he wrote a note in small letters, because notes did not count as gossip. Hands like lightning, but eyes ask permission. He had written the same words once before, months back, when he saw the sheriff walk a drunk out of a fight without touching him. He lifted the page to the light and squinted. Somebody had rubbed a spot thin in an older sheet, as if to erase a word without tearing the paper. He pressed his thumb against it gently and felt the fibrous give. He did not like that feeling. Paper ought to hold what it is told. Caleb Ransom leaned in a chair on his big veranda and watched the day wrap itself in dust. He had a fine glass of something brown cupped in his hand, and his boots crossed at the ankle. His new wife stood near the door, still in the sober black. She said, "Fit a widow." She had a railroad air, which is to say she looked like a person who knew timetables for everything and did not cry when they slipped. "You set men to a task," she said, not asking. Caleb smiled that same mouth smile he used on the road. "I set a lesson to be taught," he said. "The boy sheriff confuses mercy for law. I'll have him learn the difference." She looked past him to the river as if measuring it. "You'll have the crossing," she said, "or you'll have a war." Caleb tilted his glass. "Both," he said, and wiggled his boot heel like he scraped off something unpleasant. The river saloon filled as the day went thin. Men came because the wind drove them, and because the word went around that something would happen, something you would hate to have missed, even if you also hated to have seen it. Vickers moved among them, a blue match tucked in the band of his hat, his mouth telling small jokes that set his men at ease. He did not drink. He never did when he meant to be quick, and tonight he meant to be quick. He tapped the match against his hat once, and listened to the sound of the bell through the dust, and then he stopped listening. He waved, and the room arranged itself. 2 men near each door, one on the stair, one behind the bar, pretending to be the barman. He had stolen worse performances from better actors. But this cast would do. Mara's legs shook, but she walked into the middle of the saloon on her own feet. She had to. If she went to ground, they would drag her anyway, and there's a kind of small victory in standing for as long as you can. Eli followed, and did not make a show of it. He didn't touch his hat or call the room to order. He moved like a man who was not hungry and not full. Tala stayed at the door, and the room felt her, the way a room feels a stove go out. "We're here," Vickers said, smiling wide, and you could see where old fights had stepped on his front teeth. "Mercer, you see the stage? Stand on it." The men along the back wall made way, so the sheriff could be backed into the little dais, where the piano lived, when somebody could play it. Nobody could play it now. Eli stepped up. He looked at the bar mirror, and not at Vickers. In the mirror, he could see the man behind the bar, with his hand an inch from the scattergun. He could see the stairman chewing a splinter he had picked off the rail. He could see Mara in profile, chin up, lips swollen where the rider's glove had kissed it. He could not see the infant because the infant was somewhere behind the crowd, and the not seeing made a sound in his ears like a high wire, too tight to sing. Vickers spread his hands. "They say you're quick," he said. "Teach us a trick, boy. Drop your gun and use your hands." Eli said, "I don't like tricks." His voice carried, not loud, but clean. "Then I'll show you one," Vickers said, and let a glass slip off the edge of the bar. The glass fell. Eli didn't draw. He didn't move for the gun that wasn't on his belt. He moved his hand and tapped his knuckles against the table leg, so the table jumped and the glass changed its path enough to kiss the floor edge and slide without breaking. Two men laughed like dogs bark twice when they're not sure they mean it. Eli moved again. A coin flicked from his left hand and struck the lamp hook and bounced to the wall and dropped into Vickers' palm, as if called. "Cute," Vickers said, and the men laughed for real, because their boss had told them they could now. "You want a real show?" a voice said from the edge, and it came from Deputy Hodge, who had drifted in late and now leaned in shadow, as if he had always lived there. "Bang," Hodge said, and fired his pistol into the rafters. Plaster fell. The lamp swung. A woman shouted as the splintered pellet fanned and kissed a beam. Eli moved. He moved without reaching for a gun, and still made the sound a gun makes in the air. He grabbed the swinging lamp by its iron and slapped its glare into Vickers' eyes, and then brought his fist down on the wrist of the man behind the bar, so the scattergun twitched and boomed into the floorboards in a short-throated cough that lifted two men off their feet. The room froze, not because of fear, but because the choreography had failed. Eli's hands blurred again, and two pistols lay on the floor, and their owners stared at their empty fingers like strangers. He had not fired a shot. He had changed the direction of things. Tala stepped into the middle and set a small bundle wrapped in red cloth on the bar. She put her palm on it, and the lamp stopped swinging, and even the dust seemed to listen. "Don't trade thunder for blood," she said. She did not say it to Eli alone. She said it to every man with a finger on a trigger, and to the woman with shaking hands, and to the boy who would later swear in the yard that he hadn't meant the trouble he brought. Vickers blinked, blind spots swimming across his vision from the lamp slap, and he made a bad choice. He lunged toward Mara to use her as a shield. Eli was faster than someone who wanted to have to shoot. He didn't shoot. He kicked the chair leg into Vickers' shin, and as the thug folded, Eli reached and pulled Mara aside and put his own body where she had been. The scattergun man groaned and tried to be brave. A bottle fell and did not break. "Sheriff!" Jonah shouted from the doorway. Voice cracked from running. He held a folded paper in one hand and his ledger under the other arm. "Don't let anyone claim your shot," he said aloud, and people laughed because it sounded like nonsense in a fight. He shoved the folded paper into Eli's coat. "I found this in the parish book," he said lower. "A note got slipped in there, and then crossed out. It named your route. It named the hour." Eli's eyes touched Hodge and moved away like a finger from a hot pan. Vickers, on his knees, hissed, "Shoot him," to nobody in particular, and one of his men, eager and scared, squeezed a trigger at the wrong time and put a bullet through the rafters. A shower of dust came down like gray rain. Hodge shouted at the same moment, "Mercer fired. I saw him. which was a thing that had not happened, but might, if enough voices agreed. The saloon door banged, and Reverend Silas Morton pushed in, with a face the color of paper left in a Bible too long. "Stop," he said, and it wasn't a command. It was a plea to the better part of the men in that room, and maybe to a God who listened better at night. He held up the parish register as if its weight could quiet a mob, and for a second it did. "There's an inquiry to be made," he said. "There was blood spilled, and if there wasn't, the fear of it was." He looked around and watched how Hodge would not meet his eyes. He watched Mara touch the side of her face, and not cry. He watched Eli rubbing 2 fingers together, as if dust would not leave him. "Come to the church," he said. Now, they went because a crowd is easier to move than a single stubborn man. Vickers held back and counted his pieces like a gambler with a throw yet in his pocket. "Don't worry, boys," he said to his crew. "The show's not over. This is the interlude." He tucked the blue match back into his hatband, like a promise. Eli stepped down from the dais and passed close enough to Hodge to smell the acid fear on the deputy's skin. "You got a pellet in the beam," Eli said low. "Make sure you put something pretty under it. Folks will be looking." Hodge smiled with too many teeth and not enough warmth. "I'll stand by you," he said, and the words felt like kin to a wolf wearing a lamb's old hide. At the church, the wind pressed the walls as if curious. Reverend Morton spread the parish register open and set it on the altar rail. He looked, as he always did, surprised that paper and ink could hold so much life and be so thin at the same time. Jonah laid the undertaker's ledger beside it. The books faced each other like 2 witnesses asked to tell the same story from different ends. "We will speak plain," the Reverend said. "We will speak in turn." Eli nodded. "Start with the rafters," he said. "Then we'll speak of hands." Jonah climbed up on a bench, stood on tiptoe, and ran his fingers lightly over the fresh gouge where the stray shot had sent its small swarm of pellets. He plucked one from the soft wood with a knife tip and held it up. "Close," he said. "Fired at a steep angle. That came from the floor, not from a man shooting up from a lower step like the sheriff was." He pointed with the pellet to where Hodge had stood, in the habit of telling truth, with a gesture rather than a paragraph. Eyes turned. Hodge's neck flushed the color of raw beef when it hits the pan. "Accidents happen," he said. "We were all excited." "Excited isn't perjury," Reverend Morton murmured. He bent to the register and turned a page and found something that did not sit right with him, and his mouth thinned. "This is new," he said. "Caleb Ransom married this afternoon." He tapped the line. "A widow from back east." The ink isn't dry. A hush walked through the room, because people understood speed when they saw it. And the thing about speed is it tells you what matters to a man. Mara touched the pocket where the brass chit lay and felt it almost burn through the cloth with its little steer skull's grin. Tala stood by the back door, listening to the wind's thin song through the plank cracks. She pulled a rolled map from the basket she carried, a map whose creases remembered being folded by hands older than hers. She spread it on a bench and smoothed the corners with flat palms. The lines on it were blue and brown and faint, and some were not lines, but smudges that meant a spring had lived once and might again. "The river drops by hands that don't touch it," she said. "The bridge waits for a toll that isn't a law. Old water hides new water under the sand. You can drink if you know where to walk." Eli bent to the map like a boy at a story. "You can show me," he said, and it wasn't a question. "I can show the women," she said. "They'll show you after." He nodded because that was right, and because pride is a horse you don't ride into a place where thirst lives. Outside, the dust thickened again. A boy ran into the church so fast he forgot to take off his hat. His chest heaved. "They took a saw to the bridge planks," he panted. "Ransom's men. They say nobody crosses without paying. They say the sheriff pays double to watch him learn manners." Reverend Morton's eyes shut the way doors do when a draft comes. "That's not a toll," he said. "That's theft done slow in daylight." Eli looked at Hodge. Hodge looked at the floor and whistled air through his teeth, the way a man does when he wants a sound to hide him. Mara tightened her shawl. It smelled of milk and dust and iron. Night came, with a color like old coins. Eli saddled his bay and swung up without wasting muscle. "Don't go alone," Mara said. "He wants you in the dark." Eli smiled in a way that looked like somebody recalling a small joke told by a dead friend. "Sometimes you go alone to find who follows," he said. He touched his hat brim to Tala, and then to the Reverend, whose mouth had formed a prayer without words, and forgotten to finish it. He rode for the canyon, because the canyon collects men with bad plans, the way a gully collects leaves. He let his horse set the pace, trusting the animal's judgment more than his own thoughts. Behind him, too far to hear hooves but close enough to smell dust, riders kept the distance a coyote keeps from a campfire. On the rim, a wick sputtered, blue as a star fallen into brush. Eli drew rein and turned his head like he listened to the ground. Somewhere below, water that had not seen moonlight in months talked to itself in a language older than the town. He swung down and put his hand to the dirt. Warm. He picked up a pebble and threw it near the sputter. It landed with no sound anyone alive could hear. He smiled again, that remembering smile. "You got a fuse," he said softly to the ones he could not yet see. "You got your fire backwards." He moved then, quick and low, and the blue winked out and then sprang brighter as Vickers' man, startled, bent too near and breathed life into it. The night bloomed fire. The sound hit first, then the heat. Eli had already moved, a slab of dirt where he had been turned inside out, and fell back wrong. The bay squealed and danced like a violin string. Downriver, the bridge quivered and settled, and a board popped free and spun into black. In town, the saloon glasses chimed on their shelf, and a woman put a hand to her throat because she knew that sound and had always hoped never to hear it again. The blast carved a new curve in the canyon wall, as if a giant fingernail had idly scored it. Eli rolled, came up in a crouch, and watched small fires draw lines in the brush, like sentences half-written. Someone whooped from the shadow, and then cut the sound short when he realized he'd just told the world where his body lived. Back in Calico Ford, people spilled into the street. Ransom's toll keepers took their posts with rifles, held careful, trying to look like law. Hodge stood at the sheriff's office door with his hand on the latch, as if he owned the hinge. Jonah ran from house to house gathering candles, because when people get scared, they burn wax, as if light made by human hands can talk back to dark we didn't make. Reverend Morton rang the church bell once to say he was home, and then again, because he remembered the code the miners used long ago for trouble. He stopped with his hand on the rope, because he did not want to ring a third time unless he had to. 3 meant blood you could not hide. Vickers came into town with a new gait from the blast's kick, and a satisfied face that made you want to take soap to it, hard. He had the infant bundled up again. He lifted the shawl to check the child's breath, and nodded as if he had kept a promise somehow. "Mercer," he called, pitching his voice so it carried. "Look what I didn't break. I brought your conscience. You want it? Come take it." The men laughed, and each laugh sounded different, and told the truth about the men who made it. One laugh wanted to be brave, one wanted to be mean, one wanted to go home. Eli walked out of the dark as if it had given him back. He had blast dust on one cheek and a streak on his coat where a cinder had tried to write its name. He stood not close and not far. He looked at the child, at Mara, at Vickers' hands, at Hodge, at the bridge, at the church. He drew breath and let it out. "Let the baby go," he said, and no one mistook that for a request. Vickers grinned and shook his head like a man saying no to a pretty dessert he planned to eat anyway. "Trade," he said. "Your badge and that right hand." He nodded at Eli's fingers. "Lay them down on the step. Maybe I let the bundle roll back to its mama." Eli lifted his empty hands. He moved toward the saloon lantern that hung from a chain by the door and reached up with 2 fingers, like a man about to fix its height. The chain creaked. In the same breath he bent his wrist, nudged the lantern so it swung, tilted the mirror behind the bar with his other hand, and made a path for light to travel where it had not been. It hit Vickers straight. The man flinched without meaning to, and his grip loosened a whisper. Eli stepped and took Mara by the shoulder and put her out of the shot line and pivoted, so the world gave him angles that a boy who had practiced at dawn knew by heart. "Now," he said, not loud, and Jonah, who had been holding his ledger like a shield, threw the ledger where Eli's eyes asked him to throw it. The book hit the floorboard and leaped into the scattergun man's shin, and the man yelped and fired into the dirt. The shawl jerked in Vickers' hands. Eli's right hand moved like a story finally told. Vickers fired in panic. The crack came like the sky splitting. The infant's shawl darkened where a spray of someone's blood leaped. Mara screamed once, a sound she had never made and would never make again. The room stopped on that one note, and then everything rushed forward at once. Men shouting, chairs scraping, the lamp hissing, someone crying, the baby making no sound, and then a small one, fragile and fierce, like fire that won't lie down. Eli felt the world tilt and right itself. He saw Hodge's face, pale as chalk. He saw Tala step forward with the red-wrapped bundle from the bar. She pressed it to the child's chest and murmured words older than the church and the mines and the cattle trails. The bell tolled once, twice, 3 times. The sound climbed the dust and did not come back. Reverend Morton stood at the rope and pulled with a hand that shook. "Inquiry," he called through the clamor, voice ragged. "Emergency inquiry. Sheriff Eli Mercer, you will answer for what was done." The crowd shifted. Vickers smiled a smile that had too many meanings. Eli looked down at his hands as if to see whether blood had chosen them tonight. He lifted his eyes to the church door and nodded, as if to a sentence he'd already read in someone else's book. The infant breathed in a thin, stubborn thread. Mara held him like the world might steal him through the cracks if she loosened a finger. They carried the heat and noise of the saloon into the church, as if doors could not keep such things out. Benches scraped, boots scuffed. Men cleared their throats to buy time they did not have. Reverend Morton steadied the parish register with both hands. "We will begin," he said, looking not at the sheriff, but at the rafters where the pellet had kissed the beam. "Truth first, then blame." He nodded to Jonah. The undertaker's boy set his ledger down like a shield and climbed again to the bench. He slid the knife tip under a fresh splinter and teased it free without breaking it. He held up the pellet and the splinter together. "This came from the floor level," he said. "Low muzzle. Angle says the shooter stood inside the room, not under the stairs where the sheriff was." He pointed the small knife toward the corner, where Hodge had leaned a moment before the shot. The deputy's boots were now a half-step farther apart than usual, a trick men use when they want to look rooted. Hodge clapped slow, once, twice, as if humoring a street magician. "Young Pike," he said, almost warm, "you misunderstand how a room breathes when guns go off. Things bounce. Things lie." His smile felt like a peeled grape, slick and wrong in the hand. Eli did not look at Hodge. He looked at the pellet pinched between Jonah's fingers. The way a man looks at a coin he is not sure is real. "That one pellet will do," Eli said, voice level. "It will do because it tells a line. Lines line up with choices." He lifted the folded slip Jonah had given him. He did not open it. He held it where Hodge could see the crease. "This was tucked into the Reverend's book," he said. "It named my patrol, the hour, the door I would use. A hand wrote it. A hand crossed it out. The book did not hide the scar." Reverend Morton colored at that, because he loved his pages and hated to hear how they had been used. "I did not see the note arrive," he said. "I saw only the thin place where an erasure tried to be holy." He took the register and turned to the new page he had mentioned. "Also this," he added. "Caleb Ransom took a wife at 4 in the afternoon, widow Lydia Creed, lately of a railroad office in Santa Fe." His finger lay on the wet ink. The name shone. Mara stood near the door and tasted copper at the back of her mouth, where fear had pricked her. She touched the infant's cheek and found it slick with sweat but warm. The shawl hid the worst of the stain. She would not lift it here. Not yet. Eli stepped one pace toward the rail and put both hands flat on it. That put his palms where the congregation placed theirs when they prayed or swore vows. "Ask me," he said to Morton. "Ask what you came to ask." The Reverend swallowed. "Did you fire a shot in the saloon, Sheriff?" Eli's eyes did not blink. I did not, he said. Did your hands take guns from men? They did. Were men hurt? Not by my choice, he said. His gaze moved at last to Hodge. And not by my shot. A thin hum rose from the back benches. It took a second to find the source. Tala was there, quiet, her back to the wall, humming like a kettle almost at boil. The note was not a tune. It was a shape for breath to hold. A man pushed in from the doorway, hat in both hands, hair pasted to his forehead with dust. He breathed like a bellows. Bridge, he said. They're sawing planks. Ransom says there's a toll by order of himself. Says the sheriff pays double and pays first. A few men laughed because fear makes poor jokes. Morton closed the register as if to save it from air. The river does not belong to any one man, he said, and sounded for a moment like a younger version of himself, preaching to a mine camp that never listened. Water belongs to those who carry it, Tala said, low. She unrolled the old survey map, set it across the front pew, and weighed its corners with 4 flat stones from her basket. The map smelled of smoke and pinon sap and mouse. She traced one brown line with a finger. Here the old bed ran, she said. Here the new cuts shallow and angry. Here, a faint circle no white map ever marked, is a seep that will open if you sing to it, and shovel right. She looked up. Women and elders can move more water than rifles if you let them work at night. Eli nodded once. Show them, he said. They'll show me after. Mara felt the brass chit in her pocket heat with her skin. She stepped forward. This, she said, and placed it on the rail. The steer skull stamped on it, looked up at the room, and grinned. That came from a thug's hand. The hand that took the baby. The seal is Caleb Ransom's. The amount is for work done. She did not say the number. She did not need to. Men know what kind of work earns gold that leaves a crust. The chit lay between Reverend Morton's book and Jonah's. 2 ledgers and a coin. It looked like a field where 3 roads met. Hodge's jaw worked, a small tell he had not trained out of himself. This is too much talk, he said. Law is not talk. Law is a badge and a gun. Sheriff, you going to let the town be stopped at its own bridge while we yammer like old hens? Eli looked at him then. I'm going to walk out the door and see who stands in the way. You can come, or you can stay and practice yammering. They spilled into the street again. Dust hit the fronts of their throats like a hand. At the river, the bridge lay half shot and half sawed, teeth marks on timber, nails pried and bent. Ransom's men had stacked a row of barrels at the approach. A new sign, painted in a hurry with a brush meant for barns, read toll, and under it a smaller hand had added or else. Vickers leaned on the rail and tossed his blue match up and down like a boy with a rock. He had not lit it. His pleasure lived in the possibility. Sheriff, he called, show me your right hand. Eli did not. He looked at the barrels first. He sniffed. Kerosene, he said. Matches will run faster than mouths tonight. Vickers grinned wide. A few townsmen shifted with the weight of what that meant. Reverend Morton drew a slow breath and lifted the register as if it could parry flame. Caleb Ransom, he said, voice pitched for a crowd. You will stop this, or be named in the book as the man who burned his neighbor's way to water. Caleb stood on his veranda up the slope, coat off, shirt cuffs rolled, looking like a man who liked his own sleeves. Name me how you please, he said. Write it twice, if it makes you feel taller. The river runs where capital says it runs. The bridge holds where the owner says it holds. A woman near him, smaller, black-dressed, watched the men rather than the bridge. Lydia Creed did not smile. She counted riders. She counted barrels. She counted how many women had lifted their skirts and gone to the far bend, where the bank sloped gentle. She saw Tala among them. Tala did not look back. Night came in strips, like someone pulling shade, down in steps. Eli did what he said he would. He rode out alone, hat brim low, body loose in the saddle, not hurrying and not slow. He let the toll men measure him. He did not carry his gun belt. He dropped down at the far side of the bridge where the road narrowed and lifted his hands to show them empty. I'm coming through to look, he said. Shoot me and you own the burying. Vickers spread his hands. Mock hurt. We're not savages, he said. Come look. Bring a lantern. See how pretty the work is. He let Eli come, because he wanted Eli framed in the doorway of his stage, lit from one side, easy for the crowd to see him, when the line snapped and the trapdoor went. The sheriff bent and set his palm to the planking. He listened with his hand the way some men listen with ears. He felt a tremble that was not river. He found a fuse under the lip of a barrel and pinched it between 2 fingers. It was cut and pinned and ready. Several short pieces snaked in other directions, as if a nervous man had wired his own heart. Eli glanced up, caught Jonah's eye across the water, and made a small, precise gesture like a clock hand tick. Jonah nodded, disappeared, returned with charcoal, and kneeled to begin a rubbing on a scrap of butcher paper someone had paid for with beef and would now gladly give to ink instead. Eli straightened. "You're bad at patience," he said to the dark beyond the barrels. "You always hurry your edges." Hodge moved along the bank like a man who wanted to look like a man on patrol. "Want me to climb under there and cut lines?" he called. Eli didn't give him the dignity of a reply. He looked up the slope to Ransom's house. The veranda lamp burned steady. Lydia Creed stood with her hands on the rail now, leaning in, interested at last like a spectator whose bet has come to life. Eli's neck prickled. He could not have said whether it was the kerosene, the fuse powder, or the gaze of someone who liked to turn a page and find a surprise exactly where she had hidden it. He left the bridge with a slow nod, led his horse 3 steps, swung up clean. He rode not home, and not to the office, but to the long black cut of the canyon, where a narrow path from the mesa dropped to the water. He did not light a lantern. The bay found the edge by muscle memory. Eli dismounted again, tied off, and went the last yards on foot. His hand found a smooth rock worn by floodwater from years no one here remembered. He crouched and waited. He did not have to wait long. The blue worked like a moth, a sputter, a whisper, a mean little light that asked permission from nothing. It crawled down the line toward the barrels. Eli moved. He did not blow on it. He did not pinch it. He took a small stick from his coat, a half pencil, and laid it across the fuse, so the spark had to slow and argue with the wood. It did. "Watch," he said without sound, to the men who were not a dozen yards away, holding their breath without knowing it. Watch how quiet gets loud. The night bloomed fire. The line he had pressed slowed the first breath, enough that he could roll, enough that he did not die. The second breath came harder. The canyon wall flared yellow like teeth in a giant mouth. The bridge planks jumped as if surprised. A barrel split its seams, and through hot rain, horses on the far side pulled against their bits and squealed like small, terrified steam whistles. Jonah hit the dirt with his ledger over his head and laughed once because fear makes odd choices. Up the slope, the veranda lamp shivered. Lydia Creed did not flinch. Caleb Ransom reached to steady the glass for her, and that gesture, small and offhand, said as much about him as any speech he would later give in town. "Watch for the undertaker's charcoal rubbing of the blast marks," the narrator said, voice low, like a guide in a dark museum. "It shows something the blast sought to erase." By morning, the bridge wore a wound like a scar someone will always see first. The toll men had backed off to the barrels farther up. The town woke to a new law that was not voted and not blessed. Women moved before dawn, skirts tucked, sleeves rolled. Tala led them to the old seep by a line of greasewood. She sang, not to make magic, but to make rhythm for shovels. They dug in a ring and waited for the sand to gloss. When the first dark mirror showed, someone laughed like a child. They cupped and passed. "Drink," Tala said. "Don't waste your tongue on complaint. Put it to water." Eli came later, hat in both hands, as if entering a home that was not his. "You did this," he said. "We did," Tala answered. "And now you will do what your job says." In town, Ransom's men tightened their pretend law. They took coin at the bridge and smiles at the store. They took whiskey from behind the bar and left notes that read IOU in block letters and meant nothing. Hodge wore his badge very bright. He walked with Vickers in plain sight, a thing he would not have dared a week ago. Men saw and pretended not to see, so they would not have to act before their minds were ready. Reverend Morton visited houses with the register under his arm. He recorded 1 marriage and 2 births and 1 death, a trail hand whose heart had given out the night of the blast. Perhaps from fear, perhaps from luck running a different track. When he wrote the name, he made his letters careful and upright, as if hand posture could keep a town from slouching. Toward noon, Vickers took what he had come to take. He and 2 men came to Mara's door, while Eli was at the seep helping haul buckets. They had the look of men who liked coming in the daylight where witnesses grew. "Time for a trade," Vickers said, cheerful. "The boss wants the badge, and I want a souvenir." He looked at Eli's holster hanging on a peg. "That belt," he added, and shook his head. "No, not the belt. The hand." Mara put herself in the doorway and held the infant close. "You'll not come in," she said. Vickers tipped his hat, as if admiring a neighbor's hedge. "Ma'am," he said gently, and then pushed her aside with less force than you might use on a stuck gate. The 2 men were already across the room, fast, practiced. One pulled the pins from the cradle legs so it would fold if anyone jostled it. The other picked up the carved toy Jonah had whittled and broke it for no reason but to leave an ache. Eli reached the porch as Vickers stepped out with the infant wrapped again. "Don't," Eli said. He did not shout. He did not move too near. Vickers grinned with all his small chips and old breaks showing. "Come on, Law," he said. "You want him? Give me something pretty. Your badge. You're right." He wiggled his own fingers. "Cut him. Nail him to the step. I'll lay this bundle down like a saint." Hodge, who had trailed Vickers not to stop him, but to say later he had witnessed, he didn't know what, stood to one side and found a spot of shade for his eyes. Mara whispered, "Please," and felt hatred at the shape of the word in her mouth, and hated herself for hating it. Eli set his hat on the porch rail. He took the mirror from the wall inside the door and tucked it under his arm like a book. He lifted the saloon lantern from its hook in the eave and raised it shoulder high. "You want a show?" he said. "I'll give you a trick that doesn't kill a man." Vickers blinked because that sounded like insult, and he did not enjoy being made to feel slow. Eli stepped left and right, as if setting his feet for a dance. He held the mirror just so, and tipped the lantern just so, and the sun found a path along the glass, into the lens, across the room inside, onto the little silver comb on the far shelf, onto the bottle beside it, onto Vickers' open eye. The light stabbed. The man flinched. The infant shifted in his hands. Eli moved then. He didn't reach for Vickers. He reached for Mara, tugged her 2 steps and a half turn, exactly where a shooter behind Vickers would hate to aim. That shooter, because there is always another, swore and jerked the muzzle in a way that makes poor lines on paper, and worse in air. Jonah, who had followed with the ledger because he now feared to put it down, threw the book under the shooter's boots. The man slid and sat, hard. His pistol coughed into the floorboard. Vickers reacted with the wrong impulse, as men who live on impulse often do when plans tremble. He squeezed. The shot tore the quiet. The shawl jumped. Blood bloomed. A woman screamed from across the yard. Another voice said, "Oh God," as if it had not said the name that way since a mother died. The baby did not cry at first. Then he did. A thin, stubborn sound, like a bird that refuses to leave a wire. Reverend Morton stumbled up the path with the register under his arm and a basin in his hands, as if water could bind time. "Bring the child," he said, and did not ask whose blood had made the mark. Tala came behind him at a run that did not show in her breath. She had the red-wrapped bundle from the saloon again. She pressed it to the baby's chest. She hummed, a note that laid itself under the boy's cry, like a plank under a load. Eli stared at his right hand, as if it had betrayed him by not doing something it had promised. Hodge stood frozen, then remembered how to look like a deputy. "Sheriff," he shouted in a voice meant for crowds. "Drop your weapon." Eli did not have one in his hand. He felt suddenly how heavy a hand can feel when it is empty. Vickers backed away, eyes bright, face slack, with more feeling than he had planned to show. The 2 men with him backed too, bumping into each other. "We're done," he said, almost whispering, perhaps to himself. "No," Eli said. "We're not." He stepped after them. He did not lunge. He moved like water under a thin ice, finding seams. He cut the angle to the left, A lantern chain hung from the porch. He knocked it with a knuckle. The lantern swung and threw light hard into Vickers' face a second time. The man flinched again, and this time dropped his pistol. Eli did not catch it. He did not need a second gun in his story. He needed one shot the world would understand. He took the gun he had never dropped on the step, because it had never been on his belt, and laid it on the rail, in full view. He looked at Hodge. "Pick that up," he said, pointed away from anyone living. For a second, Hodge's face showed the child he had been, the one who could not climb the big rock at the creek, and lied about why he had not tried. Men gathered because men do. Ransom's riders drifted closer, at a lope slow enough to say they were not afraid, and fast enough to say they might be embarrassed if they were late to the end. Lydia Creed stood on the veranda, still as white on a page. She had a small folder in her hand, the kind that holds bills of lading and deeds. She watched Vickers, more than she watched Eli. She watched Hodge most of all. Her gaze counted like an auditor's. Mara held the baby, and when she drew the shawl aside, she saw the truth of the stain. It was not a hole in the child. It was Eli's cheek bleeding, where a splinter from the porch had kissed him when he moved. The blood had trickled and stamped the cloth with his life, as if the boy had been sealed with the sheriff's name. Her knees buckled with relief, so sudden it made the ground tilt. Reverend Morton's hands shook so much, the water in the basin shivered. "We can do this now," he murmured. "The book allows for emergency. The soul does not wait for a quieter day." He dipped his fingers and touched the infant's brow. "I baptize you." He halted. "Name?" he asked, scandalized by the mechanics of it, and looked to Mara as if names should come like milk. Mara swallowed. "He was born on the trail," she said. "His mother died with her teeth clenched. She never said." Her voice broke once, and then held. "Write him blank," Tallis said from the doorway. "Write a mark and a space. We will fill it when he tells us." Morton nodded. His quill scratched. He wrote a line where a word would be. He had not done such a thing in 20 years. His stomach hurt, the way a man's does when he does right, that feels like wrong at first. The bell began to toll because he pulled it 3 times. He did not want to, but the law in him made his hand do the work. The sound hopped down the street and touched every window and set dogs to bark. Eli lifted the baby and kissed his hair. The sheriff's blood made a small cross on the boy's forehead, not by ritual, but by accident, which some would later say is just another kind of ritual, one not done by men. "Emergency inquiry," Morton called again. "Sheriff Eli Mercer, you will answer for what was done." Eli nodded, set the baby in Mara's arms, and stepped into the street with hands open, the way a man steps into a river to test its speed. Inside the church, the room had the hush of a place that knows something important is about to be spoken and is bracing itself to accept or deny it. Jonah laid the ledger open. He had made the charcoal rubbing at dawn, while men shouted at barrels. He held it up now. The black smears looked like a map drawn by someone with cold hands. "Here," he said, tapping a denser patch, "is where the long line met the short. Somebody cut extra stubs, left them half set. This wasn't one blast. It was a choir." He looked at the reverend, then at the sheriff. "A choir means a conductor." Morton turned his register to the new marriage again. "Ransom has money and cattle," he said. "This," he tapped Lydia Creed's name, "has timetables and trains." Eli took the folded slip from his coat at last. He opened it. The crease was tired. The ink had been wet, and then smeared, and then rubbed. He read. A short line, a time, a door. "This told them where I would be," he said. Someone who wore a badge told them. He did not look left or right when he said it. He did not need to. The air between him and Hodge had changed temperature, and the room felt it. Hodge flushed again. Anger first, then shame, then anger at the shame. "You are quick with your hands," he snapped. "Quick hands make men proud. Proud men fall." He stood, shoved his chair back with a scrape. "I won't sit here to be spit on by a boy who plays tricks." He pushed past 2 men and out into the street and walked faster than a man who has nowhere particular to be. Vickers waited for him in the shade between the church and the smithy. "You got soft," Vickers said to him without turning his head, "or you got paid too little." Hodge glared and did not answer. Vickers smiled and gave him a little slap on the back of the head. Lazy and cutting. Fetch your courage, he said. We go to the bridge. We're going to teach the town to count. They lit the barrels near sunset. The river took fire where the kerosene ran off in weeping lines. Smoke rolled low. People stood on porches as if distance could save them from smoke. The wind pushed flames toward the midspan, and then, with a big mind of its own, changed and bullied them back, so the bridge did not fall yet. Ransom's men cheered in bits and pieces to keep from hearing their own hearts. Ransom himself sat on his veranda and peeled an orange with a knife short as a finger. The peel came off in one long curl. Lydia Creed watched the curl bounce and settle. She made a small note in the folder she held. The sound of her pencil made Caleb flinch. "You write like a judge," he said. "Someone has to," she said, and did not look up. At midnight, while the men admired their own smoke, Tala led the women again by the back way to the seep. They had 3 more buckets ready, and 2 boys had found a broken trough. They poured slow, in a chain, letting small riches do big work. By dawn, there were 6 small pools, and a trickle between them. Eli took his turn with a shovel, because a badge does not make a man exempt from thirst. Mara stood with the baby tucked under her shawl and watched the sun touch the edges of town. For a second it looked like the simple place she had imagined when she came west, a place where hard work met sky and shook hands. Then the wind shifted and threw ash under her tongue. "We don't get to keep the morning," she said to nobody. By afternoon, the town was tired in the way only heat and fear make you. That is when Vickers chose to move. He walked straight into the street with the infant in his arms, and a smile like he brought a gift. Men came out to look. Women did too, because hiding at such moments makes your body shake later. Hodge came with him, badge bright, hand on his pistol so natural it looked like it had grown there. "Trade," Vickers said to Eli, who had stepped from the office with his coat off, and his sleeves rolled like a man who had meant to carry water. "Badge in hand," Vickers repeated. "On the step. Then you can have this small trouble back." He lifted the shawl and kissed the baby's head, slow, obscene, in its softness. Mara made a sound that had no word in it. Eli looked at the step. He looked at his right hand. He saw in his mind, for one short flash, the way he had learned to be quick. A Comanche man with patient eyes had set a pebble on a stump and said, "Touch it," before the fly leaves. A girl with braids and a scar on her thumb had laughed when he missed, and had sung when he did not. He heard the girl again, older, from across years, singing now by a seep and saving a town. "I won't give you my hand," he said to Vickers. "You already have too many things that don't belong to you." He lifted the mirror again. He lifted the lantern. The move looked the same. It wasn't. He set the lantern higher. He angled the mirror steeper. He let the sun go not into Vickers' eyes, but into the eyes of the man behind Vickers, and a step to the left, the one nobody had watched because he had the dull face of a man who never chooses. That man flinched. He fired, by reflex. The shot cracked the sign above the office and made the E in sheriff jump like a tooth knocked loose. Eli stepped into the wake of that noise and did something that looked like nothing to anyone who didn't know what his hands could do. He tapped the lantern so it swung hard and bright. He bent his wrist. He slid. He spoke without words to Jonah with his eyes. Now, Jonah threw the ledger again, foolish and perfect. It hit Vickers' shin. The thug's knees dipped. Eli reached, but not for the baby, and not for Vickers' gun. He reached for the pistol the dull-faced man had just fired, and had not yet remembered he held. He took it. He used it without aiming, the way a man uses a hammer on a nail he knows by feel. He fired into the dirt 2 inches from Vickers' boot. The dust jumped a mouthful into the man's eyes. He swore, stumbled, tightened his hold on the infant by instinct. The baby cried. Hodge had his gun up now. Finally, in the scene he believed he had written. He aimed at Eli's back. Tala spoke a word that had in it the sound of someone's name from years ago. Eli heard that word and turned, not with mind, but with bone. Hodge's muzzle dipped. He missed his moment and shot a rope instead. The lantern dropped, hit, spit oil, set the porch edge alight. Men shouted. Someone kicked the flame. It smudged and went meaner and lower. Vickers' cool face cracked. He fired. The shawl jumped and darkened. The crowd made one sound, like a held breath breaking. The baby wailed, alive, furious. Mara lunged and took him. Blood smeared wider. Eli went still with a stillness that scared Hodge more than speed ever had. He looked at Vickers and saw in him at last the thing he had been trying not to see all week. A man who wanted the taste of a kill more than he wanted coin, who needed it like a sick man needs a bad herb because it feels like it does something. The sheriff's restraint thinned to a thread. "Stop," Reverend Morton shouted, but his voice was a raft in a flood. "Not here," Tala said. On a breath, the men nearest felt on their skin. Eli moved again like light. He didn't go for Vickers. He went for Hodge, who had finally found a clear shot, and tore the gun from his hand and threw it under the porch with a clatter. "Go," he said to the deputy, voice flat. "Run to your buyer." Hodge did. He ran without the look-back brave men do when they run. He ran up the slope toward Ransom's veranda, like a child late for a whipping. Mara peeled the shawl and saw what the blood had done. It had painted the cloth with a wet, dark cross and soaked the edge of the child's cap. It had come from Eli's face and from a cut on her own palm, where she had caught a splinter and not felt it at the time. The baby was slick with other people's lives and roaring against the world because the world had dared to touch him. Reverend Morton poured water over his crown then and there. "I baptize you in the name." He stopped again, in pain at the same old problem. He looked to Eli. Eli shook his head once. "Leave it blank," he said. "Let him choose his own." And in that sentence was the whole of the man he was trying to be. Men on the hill shuffled like a herd turning. Ransom stood. Lydia Creed whispered without moving her lips. Hodge reached them, panting, and put his hands on his knees like he would be sick. Vickers wiped his eyes with his sleeve and tasted dust and oil and something else that was not remorse. "We're not done," he told Eli. "We end this when I say, not when you say." Eli lifted his chin. "You end it," he said, "when the ledger says." He looked at Jonah. The boy opened the book on the porch rail. His pencil hovered. He did not write. He waited because he had learned that names come too easy to people who want stories tidy. The bell tolled again, not because Reverend Morton meant to ring it, but because his hand, without asking his mind, pulled the rope when the weight in the room shifted. The sound set the dogs to bark, and the babies to fuss, and the old men to spit and curse because bells are supposed to tell you what to do, and this one told only that things were not over. Eli stepped back into the street. "We go up," he said to no one and everyone. "We go speak to the man who thinks he owns a river." He wiped his cheek with the back of his hand and left a thin red line that looked like a map a child had drawn. He picked up his hat and set it on his head and saw, in the corner of his eye, a scrap of paper under the porch where Hodge's gun had skittered. He reached, caught it with 2 fingers, unfolded. A list, not long, names with numbers. One line rubbed thin where someone had tried to take it back. He slid it into his coat. As the crowd moved, Lydia Creed stepped from the veranda at last and came down 3 steps to meet them partway. She held her small folder like a shield. "Sheriff," she said. Her voice had the weight of someone used to being obeyed because it wastes less time. "You have made a mess." Eli stopped. "I've kept a worse one from happening," he said. "Have you?" she asked, and almost smiled. "The bridge still stands enough to charge. The men still stand enough to scare. The town stands enough to hope. That last is the dangerous part. Hope makes people spend. I approve of that in theory. In practice, it complicates my timetable." She lifted a paper, not for Eli, but for Caleb, who had come close enough to hear. "You invested in powder," she said to her husband. "Next time you will invest in people who don't panic at light." Caleb's cheeks flushed. "You speak big for a clerk," he said. She flicked her gaze at Eli's pocket, as if she could see the folded list through cloth. "I am the book," she said. "He is the hand that tries to write in it." Vickers sidled left, weighting his toe on the dirt, as if testing how fast it would let him move. Eli saw it and said, without moving his head, "If you run, Run clean. Don't take anyone else's breath with you. For once, the thug didn't have a reply ready. He touched the blue match in his hatband with the gentleness a man might use on a charm. You sermon fine, he muttered. You'll preach better with holes. They climbed. The hill was steeper than men like to remember in the heat. At the top, the veranda boards creaked under more weight than they were meant for. Caleb Ransom stood square in the center, as if he were a post himself. Lydia Creed stepped aside, like she knew where to stand, to be safe, and to see everything. Reverend Morton opened his register. Jonah opened his ledger. 2 books faced a man who owned neither. Tala came to the step and set the red-wrapped bundle down. The bundle was small and plain, and made the porch look like a place where old and new law might kiss and not bite. The name, Eli said, pulling the folded list from his pocket, that someone tried to erase from a different page. It's here again. He smoothed the paper on the rail. Sweat made it stick. Powder, Bridge, buyer of record. He said the name. It was not Caleb Ransom's. It was Lydia Creed. People murmured. Not in surprise exactly, but in the way people murmur when a guess becomes a fact, and the shape of it still stings. Lydia did not blink. Efficiency, she said simply. I arrange. He smiles. You dance. The town pays. The railroad comes. You will thank me later. Later is a house that never gets built here, Eli said. We live in now. He lifted his chin. I'm taking the river back. Vickers laughed. Sound brittle now. He lifted his gun at Tala, because cowards pick what they think are soft targets. Eli's restraint dissolved. He drew. He did not think about it. He did not aim the way teachers teach. His body did what it had been taught by hunger and grief and practice, and the steady eyes of a girl with a scar on her thumb who once sang him straight. The shot cut the air so thin, one man swore he felt it on his cheek. Vickers stumbled back as if someone had kicked his knee. Hodge, who had found another gun somewhere, men like him always do, brought it up at Eli's back. Eli pivoted on the ball of his foot, fired again. 2 bodies dropped. The town inhaled the same breath and held it. The infant cried from Mara's arms and then hiccuped, a tiny noise in a field of gun smoke and men making bigger sounds. Rain dotted the dust. 1, 2, 3 cold taps on hot ground, heads tilted up. Clouds that had rolled around all week and given nothing, gave something at last. Thin at first, then steady. Water fell on the veranda. It pattered on the ledger leaves. Jonah hunched over the page to keep it from blurring, and laughed because he could not help it. Old and new law meet, he said, half to himself. Reverend Morton read the name again, firmly, like a man carving rather than writing. Now that the quill had found the right groove, Lydia Creed stood and let the rain wet her face without moving to wipe it. Caleb Ransom took a step back, because rain makes some men feel small. Men started down toward the river with ropes, as if a command had gone out. No one had given it. The town pulled together without speeches, instinctive and practical. Tala lifted the bundle from the step and set it in the crook of the doorframe, where a new drip ran. For the next thing, she said. Eli lowered his gun, breathing hard for the first time, because sometimes a man lets his breath out only after his hands do what they've been asking to do all day. He felt the cut on his cheek sting as the rain washed dust into it. He felt the bruise on his forearm, where a door had tried to write its name on him. He felt the weight of the badge on his vest, and how it had begun to feel wrong, not because law was wrong, but because this law needed him not to wear a star while he spoke what he would speak. Vickers twitched on the boards, and then went still. Hodge breathed once more, and did not again. Caleb Ransom took it in, and squared his shoulders, like he could balance this too with a ledger entry and a handshake. Lydia Creed did not step toward her husband. She looked at Eli. She raised her folder just a fraction, in a gesture that could have meant surrender or calculation. Her eyes did not give it away. The town, she said, has chosen the slow fight. Eli gave her back a look that said he knew a slow fight is still a fight. It's the only one we win, he said. Lightning stitched the far mesa and left a smell of tin. The river swelled a finger's width, and then, too, men at the bridge cheered as a rope tightened and a remaining plank swung back to meet its place. Women at the seep laughed as the pool filled faster, and the mud tried to be clean. Mara pressed the baby's heel with her thumb and felt the life in him kick. She sat on the church step and cried without hiding her face. Reverend Morton put the register down beside her and covered both with his coat, as if to keep them from rain that was, for once, a blessing. "The sealed hospital note will tell you whose blood stained that cloth," the narrator whispered as thunder rolled low and long, "and why the stain prompted a midnight baptism without a name." Vickers' eyes flickered. Jonah leaned to see if breath fogged. It did. A mark in the wet dust at the veranda's edge, small and deliberate, caught Jonah's eye. A strike, a drag, a tiny smear of match-head blue. He stared. He did not call out. He turned a page in the ledger and did not write the second name yet. He felt the hair rise on his arms. He looked at Eli and shook his head a fraction, a private signal that said, "Wait." Eli nodded the same small nod, back, and in that exchange the town's next fear was born and held in place for one more hour. Rain softened the ash and pushed the smell of powder down into the boards. The veranda bled black at the seams. Men kept their voices low because gun smoke still clung to their throats and because the ground itself seemed to be listening. Eli holstered his gun slow, as if speed now would be disrespect. He looked at Vickers without moving closer. The man's chest rose and fell a hand's width. His eyes were half open and not seeing anything near. Hodge lay with his face turned to the step, rain tracing a clean line through the dirt on his cheek, as if someone had drawn where the truth ran. Caleb Ransom tried to make his mouth do something like dignity, and found it would not. Lydia Creed breathed like a woman who had climbed a long hill and was saving her last breath, for when someone asked a question, she preferred not to answer. Jonah tore a page from his butcher paper rubbing and laid it on the porch rail beside the ledger so the wet would not erase the charcoal too fast. He looked at the place where a thin blue smear marked the board, 12 inches from Vickers' hand. He looked at Eli and gave the smallest shake of his head again. Not yet. Eli gave the smallest nod. Wait. Rain tapped the tin. The town waited with him because they had fallen into the habit of following his timing, without knowing when it started. Reverend Morton cleared his throat, which sounded like gravel. "Caleb Ransom," he said, turning toward the man and setting the register on the rail as if it were a witness. "You will give your word to stand for court at dawn. You will give up your rifles into the church. You will walk where the town can watch your back. If you run, you will be written down as you are." Caleb's smile had left for the night. "Under what law?" he said, thin. "Under the only law that keeps a place like this from eating itself," the Reverend answered. "The one men make together while the river rises." Lydia lifted her folder, as if to frame will with paper. "You have no jail that can hold a contract," she said, "but you do have signatures. Sheriff, if you want a clean proceeding, you will write yours where it belongs." Eli put his palm on his vest, where the badge sat under the wet cloth. He felt the hard star press his ribs. "I will write," he said, "but I won't sign as sheriff." He unpinned the badge and set it on the red bundle Tala had placed by the door, the way a man lays down a blade before entering a house where a baby sleeps. A murmur moved through the gathered like wind through cotton. Mara felt her heart lurch, because the badge had looked right on him, even when it had felt wrong to him. Eli's face eased in a way it had not all week, as if a muscle under his eye had finally let go. "I testify as a man," he said, "not as an office." The sentence took some heat out of the night and left a cleaner kind. They walked Ransom to the church with rope on his wrists and none on his mouth. He talked anyway. "You think you've won, because the sky finally remembered how to weep," he said to anyone who would listen. "Rain does not pay debt." "No," Jonah murmured at his shoulder, "but it calls in the kind of debt you don't get to keep." Lydia went with them because she did not let paper walk where she could not see it. She did not take her husband's arm. She counted steps. The townsmen stacked their rifles in the vestibule. The wood made a sound like a fence being mended. Tala carried the red bundle before her with quiet hands. Mara followed, the infant tucked tight, his breath warm against her collarbone. Eli walked last, neither pushing nor pulled, watching back trail, eyes flicking once to the veranda, where the blue smear had been. The rain had thinned it, but not taken it. Inside, the emergency inquest looked like ordinary church, except for the way all the faces pulled toward the rail and the way the bell rope hung dead, still in wet air. Reverend Morton lit 2 lamps and set them far apart, so shadows could not cluster into lies. He opened the register. Jonah opened the ledger. The pages drank lamplight and reflected none. "Speak, then," Morton said. "Who bought the powder and paid the men?" Eyes moved to Lydia before they settled, because the town had already learned where the answer would sit. "I arranged it," she said levelly. "The contract bears my name. My husband desired a crossing under order. The railroad desires a schedule. A sheriff who prefers tricks to obedience is bad for both." "And a bridge blown at night is better?" Eli asked. "A correction," she said. "A message. Your hands send messages also. You just prefer the ones that leave men breathing to read them." She glanced toward Vickers' absence behind them. "Mostly." Jonah raised the charcoal rubbing. "The blast came late because somebody touched the fuse who didn't know patience," he said. "The late made the loud. The loud made the town wake. The waking is why we are here, and not counting the burnt." He set the rubbing next to the register, paper beside paper. "One more page," Eli said quietly. He pulled the folded slip from his coat and smoothed it with careful fingers. "A note in the Reverend's book named my route the night at the saloon. The hand that wrote it crossed it out, but did not unwrite what it meant." He looked into the room and did not blink when his gaze found Hodge's empty space. "That is done," he said. "The name for that page is written." He did not put a name to air. He didn't need to. The law in the room did not belong to one man and his word. It belonged to what they all had seen. Caleb twisted his wrists against rope like he was testing whether his pride could cut hemp. "Fine," he said. "Write it. I'll sign what your court wants and go home. I have cattle that don't drink." "Sermons." Lydia did not move. "You won't go home," she said. "Not yet. Too many eyes." She looked at Eli as if they were 2 clerks setting a docket. "You will have to keep him in a place with food and a door." Eli nodded to Jonah. "Root cellar," he said. "My office has a door without a lock. The earth under it knows how to hold." Jonah shrugged. "Earth has held worse." Mara frowned. "He'll breathe?" "We'll lay planks," Jonah said. "He'll breathe as much as the town allows." They moved the inquest to paper. Morton read back the words he wrote like a man tasting a stew for salt. The room settled around the cadence. When the Reverend finished, he closed the register and did something he had never once done in Calico Ford. He tied a ribbon around the book and knotted it. "No more hands inside this until the judge comes," he said. "I am done hiding thin places." He looked older and lighter both. He looked at Eli with something like apology in his eyes and something like pride. Near midnight, while men argued politely about watch lists and rope knots, a woman from the far edge of town pushed in out of the wet with a parcel under her blouse. She had the look of someone who had decided to be useful and then afraid, in that order. "This came on the Santa Fe coach a week ago," she said, setting the parcel on the rail. "The driver left it with me by mistake, and I put it under my bed because I thought it worried me less there. But I slept worse. It has seals." The parcel was brown paper tied neat with twine. 4 impressions of wax showed crosses and a hospital stamp. Reverend Morton touched the seal with his finger like a man testing a tooth. "Mercy Ward, Sisters of Charity, Santa Fe," he read aloud. "To Sheriff's Office, Calico Ford." He looked at Eli. "It waited under a bed while we guessed," he said, the closest he would come to a rebuke. Eli cut the twine with his pocket knife and lifted the lid of the thin pine box inside. Inside the box was a stack of paper thinner and stronger than anything the town kept. The first sheet was a hand-colored certificate, live birth, recorded by Sister Agnes, at the side of the Santa Fe Trail, 5 days east. Mother deceased of fever and trouble. Beneath that, a note in a smaller hand, pinned at the corner. Delivered alive to traveling midwife with the surname Pike. Another slip, folded twice over, held a name in tidy script, Mercy R., and then no more letters. The last had been smudged, as if the hand that wrote it shook, or someone later tried to thumb the name off. Another page again, different ink, cooler, businesslike, bore the name Lydia Creed in a list of railroad reimbursements. 4. Relocation of a house servant no longer required. The bottom sheet showed a clerk's checkmark and a date that matched the day Mara delivered on the trail. The church went quieter than gun smoke ever made it. Mara's knees softened. She took the baby from Jonah, who had been holding him while Eli cut twine, and held him against the new truth, like the boy could feel what paper meant. I knew her face, she whispered. The dead woman. She worked once at the way station. She didn't look at men's eyes, and they punished her with talk. Reverend Morton swallowed. He took up his pen like it was heavier than before. We will add to the register what is real, he said. The mother had a name. Someone tried to erase it with initials. We will write the letters we can and leave the rest, unshamed. He dipped the pen and wrote in a careful, patient hand, Mercy, woman, deceased on the trail, child alive, baptized in need, guardian to be determined by the court of this town, in daylight. He did not try to force a surname where there was none. He did not try to guess a father on paper. Eli stood with his hands on the back of a pew, fingers spread. That's why we baptize without a name, he said. Not because we didn't care, because we refused a lie that would feel neat. He looked at the boy, at Mara, at the room. Something in him unclenched, and something else set like poured iron. I won't marry while this child needs a name that isn't borrowed, he said plain. I won't sign my line on the register beside anyone's until we can write his full line clean. The sentence surprised some and relieved others, and bruised a few and saved the town from rumors that would have eaten it for months. It also answered a question Mara had not dared ask herself. It hurt and did not sour. She looked at Eli and nodded once, small and respectful, because some kinds of refusal are a form of promise. They made a cell in Jonah's dirt and plank, and would have felt strange about it if they had not been tired enough to sleep anyway. Ransom went down the ladder with more care than pride, because men understand gravity at night better than by day. Lydia Creed watched him vanish through the square mouth in the floor, and did not flinch when someone pushed the board across. You will need a lawyer with 2 tongues, she said to Eli. One for Santa Fe and one for Washington. We'll start with one for here, Eli said. The kind that speaks more with hands than with Latin. Lydia's mouth made the shape of a smile and decided against it. We'll see which language wins, she said. Just before dawn, Jonah went back alone to the veranda with a lantern cupped low. He stood where the blue smear had been and lifted his light angle by angle, like a man reading an inscription on stone. There, near the edge of the boards, almost lost to rain, the small drag of a match head streaked toward the steps. A kneeling man had crawled that way. Blood drops, washed thin, still made their own broken row. Jonah followed with the care of a boy who likes puzzles and hates being right when right means trouble. The trail went down into the yard and across to the line of scrub beyond, where a wet print of a hand lifted and slid and lifted again. It led not toward the river, where a hurt man might hope to lose sign, but toward the back cut of the canyon, where water talks under breath. Jonah rested his lantern on a rock and considered leaving it there as a marker. He picked it up instead and cupped it and went to find Eli. They took no posse. They took Tala, because the cut belonged to her ears more than to any man's, and they took Mara, because she would not be left from the end of what she had begun at the broken wagon, and because she held the baby, and the baby had become the town's argument with the weak. The sky was a dull tin lid. The rain had thinned to a cold stitch that drew lines down faces. The canyon path smelled like flint and wet sage. At a bend where flood had undercut the rock, they found the blue match for real. Not smear this time, but a stick, ruined at the head, bitten between teeth by some fool's pain, and left half swallowed. Eli crouched and set 2 fingers on it. He wasn't thinking, he said. He was trying to make a charm out of a habit. Tala put her palm on the wall and hummed a note so low a man might mistake it for his own blood in his ears. He is ahead and below, she said. His breath is louder than the water to someone who knows both. They found him in a pocket where the canyon made an elbow, and old driftwood had collected. Vickers had propped himself against a log like a man who had come a long way and found one small mercy. Wood raised him out of the seep. He had bound his side with his shirt. The cloth was dark and stuck. His face was gray, where it was not red. In the hatband, the empty space where his blue match should live looked more naked than his wound. He turned his head when Eli stepped in, and for a second looked like a boy, about to lie, and then cry, and then lie again. He lifted his pistol, and the hand shook. "Don't," Eli said softly. He did not draw. "You reach, I end it. You breathe, I carry you to court. Pick between dying like a man who loved flame, or living like a man who stared it down and chose water." Vickers's gaze slid past Eli to Mara, and then to the baby, and then to Tala, and then somewhere behind his own eyes, where a small boy he used to be still sat with a candle stub and watched wax make walls. He smiled weakly. "I should have lit it," he whispered, and you could not tell if he meant the fuse or his match, or some wick in his heart that had guttered whenever quiet came near. He moved his hand, and in that small arc, Eli saw he had picked. The gun came up, jerking. Eli drew and shot in the same breath, not for the heart, but for the wrist. Bone cracked. The pistol fell and went off into the mud with a cough that surprised no one and hurt everyone's ears anyway. Vickers cried out once, short. He looked at his ruined hand with a kind of shock that men reserve for the first time they feel like the world has knocked a tool out of them they thought they were born with. "You're done," Eli said, and meant it. He slid the gun away with his boot. Mara stepped up with her jaw tight, the baby's weight plain in her arms, and for a mean second she wanted to kick the man into the seep and watch the cold make a claim. She did not. She hated herself a little for wanting, and then forgave herself because she had a child in her hands, and people with children sometimes carry an extra shard inside. "Tie him," she said. Jonah moved, fast and competent. Tala wrapped a length of damp rawhide around the wrist above the break and hummed again. The hum in a key that makes a person think of their first fire and their first water at the same time. They got him back to town on a door used as a litter. Men came out and then stepped aside because a man on a door looks like a man halfway between two places, and people do not like to stand too near that. Vickers stared at the sky without blinking, because rain on his eyeballs felt better than closing them. He did not spit. He did not taunt. He did not beg. He saved what he had left for breath. They put him in a different cellar than Ransom's, because you do not stack wolves, even when they are muzzled. Jonah took down the names in the ledger, pencil slow. "Cole Vickers," he wrote. "Called Blue Match. Breath present." He finished Hodge's line. He drew a dash after it, because sometimes mercy is leaving a white space between a name and the dirt it lies in. By noon, a territorial judge arrived who looked like dust, had lost its taste for him long ago. He read the Reverend's register with a lawyer's mouth. He heard Jonah. He heard Mara. He heard Tala without interrupting once, which is how you tell a decent judge in a place where people pay to talk over each other. He looked at Lydia Creed longer than he looked at Caleb. "You signed the purchase," he said. "You hired men who cut planks and cut breath. You speak as if order excused you." "Order demanded it," she said. "There is no commerce without force beneath it. There is no town with nothing but force," he answered, and surprised himself by saying something he had not said aloud in 15 years on the circuit. He set bail no one could meet out of pocket. He told Jonah to keep the ledger open and honest. He told Reverend Morton to keep the register tied and then bring it loose to court in Santa Fe. He told Eli to keep testifying as a man without a badge, because his answers sounded cleaner that way. They buried Hodge in the small plot behind the church, where men who made bad choices sometimes slept next to men who made worse. And it did not matter because the stones ended up the same height. Only 3 people came, which was 2 more than he deserved, and 1 less than he had once imagined in boyhood. Reverend Morton spoke short. Jonah set a small stone on the fresh dirt. He did not write. He had already written enough for the day, and you cannot write a man back to decent. That night, after the judge and his clerk slept in the schoolhouse and the rain turned to a fine mist, that made lantern glass sweat. Eli walked the river with Tala. He did not carry a gun. He carried the hospital file under his coat to keep it dry, as if paper needed warmth, too. You could have killed him clean, Tala said without scolding. The first time, the second, the third. I know, Eli said. My hands wanted it when he aimed at you. And? She asked. I was taught to shoot by people who used bullets as last words. Not first, he said. The last word is enough. They stood together and watched the rope line move as men pulled another plank into place. The river, pleased with itself, tucked the plank and held it, as if saying, "See, this is how you keep people." Mara rocked the baby on the porch steps and listened to their voices carry, not what they said, but the way two old friends talk when war has shaken a few truths loose and left them on top where anyone can see. She looked down at the boy and said nothing about his mother to him, because telling a story wrong at the start is a sin, even when no church will name it. She kissed the place on his forehead, where Eli's blood had stained him, and found, to her surprise, that the fear she had felt of what the town would say had gone soft at the edges. People already spoke about the child as if he were theirs collectively, which is a risk and a blessing both. Toward morning, footsteps came soft up the side of the church. Jonah was on watch by the cellar doors. He lifted his head and saw a shadow cross the lamplight and then not cross. He waited for his heart to slow enough to listen right. The footsteps went not to Ransom's door and not to Vickers' door, but to the church itself. A pause. The click of the latch. The sound of a man stepping inside like a thief who wants to smell faith. Jonah went to the window and put his eye to the crack. Lydia Creed stood by the altar rail with the parish register in her hands. She did not open it. She touched the ribbon and let it fall back. She did not steal. She left something. A small envelope, plain but heavy for its size, slid under the book. Then she was gone, as neat in retreat as in advance. At sunup, Reverend Morton found the envelope and brought it to the rail, like a boy brings a snake his brother left in his boot. Eli broke the seal and tipped it into his palm. 2 items fell out. 1, a key. 2, a note in a fine business hand that had learned ink from bills of lading, for the court, for the cellar, for the bridge that will belong to whoever can keep it repaired. He looked at the key and frowned, because it was not for any lock in town. Lydia stood across the room with her hands clasped, face flat. Railroad keys open more than doors, she said. You will find a warehouse west of the bend, with powder enough to build, not only to break. Why? Eli asked. Because your slow fight will not of itself feed a timetable, she answered. Because a town that cannot replace what it loses becomes a ghost we pay to reroute around. Because I prefer opponents who are alive when we meet again. In another town that would have been a threat. In this one, it was almost the shape of respect. They took the key, and the judge made a clumsy speech about jurisdiction and prudence, and then told Eli to use what he found if it would keep the bridge from being a story people told in the past tense. Too soon. Men hauled crates and cursed happily when they found tools that fit and nails that did not shatter. Women carried bread and salt meat. Boys carried messages. Girls carried the kind of attention that notices where a man leaves a hammer and hands it to him without him asking. The town got busy in the way towns do when they can smell a chance to be better than last week. By evening, with 3 more planks set and the rope line singing like a saw, the judge signed papers that sent Caleb Ransom and Lydia Creed under guard to Santa Fe for arraignment. Lydia gave Mara one look that did not ask for forgiveness or offer it. Caleb tried one last flourish. You can take me in, he said to Eli, but you can't take the river. Eli looked past him to where Tala stood, ankle deep in the seep, with a line of children filling cups, as if they were at a festival instead of a fight. It looks like the river took us, he said. We're just unlearning how to let someone sell it back. They put Ransom on a wagon. Lydia climbed up herself without help. She did not look back. Vickers did not ride. He lay in the cellar, wrist splinted, fever, thinking it owned him. A guard sat on the doors and sang tunelessly. Jonah sharpened his pencil and added a line to the ledger. Bridge mending begun with borrowed nails. He liked how it sounded. He left space after it because he had learned this week that leaving space sometimes told the truth better than cramming in a word. After dark, when lanterns winked out one by one, and the river made a sound like a big cat purring at last, Eli went alone to the edge of the canyon, where the blast had curled stone into a new letter. He stood there long enough to hear the own breath change shape in his chest. He took the hospital file from under his coat and folded it once more at the creases the sisters had made. He tied it with the coach twine and took it to the church and put it in a drawer that had held dice once and now would hold names. He set his badge beside it. He closed the drawer. He did not lock it because things that are meant to be opened should never learn to hate hinges. He walked out to the porch where Mara sat with the child asleep on her knees. The stain on the shawl had dried to a color between rust and wine. He looked at it and did not flinch. "We'll ask the judge for guardianship in your name," he said. "We'll write unknown father without shame and Mother Mercy with all the letters we can. I will stand when asked. I will not stand as a husband while a blank sits in a book and looks like a bruise." Mara nodded. "I didn't come west for a husband," she said, almost smiling. "I came for a life that isn't afraid of a ledger." He let out a breath that felt like something leaving him that had needed to go for a long time. "Good," he said. "Then we're both in the right place." A shout came from the churchyard. The guard at Vickers's cellar door stood, lantern held high. "He's gone," he said, voice thin. The door lay with its board thrown back. The lantern showed wet drag where a body had slid, and boot sign where someone else had helped or hindered, or both. Jonah ran with his ledger under his arm, because habit is stronger than sleep. Tala moved like weather. Eli reached the hole and dropped in without ceremony, boots in the dirt, eyes scanning the corners. No blood fresh, no rope cut by teeth. The back wall had a loosened stone, not enough for a body, but enough for a hand. On the floor by the ladder lay a single blue smear, neat, deliberate, like a man had learned to write his name in one color. Eli touched it. It came away faint on his finger. "He had help," Mara said quietly. She did not ask who. Some answers taste the same no matter whose mouth says them. They followed sign to the alley, and then lost it where rain had made a wash of the lane. On the far side of town, a boy who should have been in bed saw a figure slip by the livery and disappear toward the flats. He did not call out, because something in the way the man moved made calling feel like lighting a match in a powder shed. He told Jonah in the morning, stammering, then told it cleaner, then apologized for leaving parts out. Jonah wrote only 2 words beside Vickers' line, "Body missing." He put his pencil down. He looked at Eli. Eli did not smile. "We don't get to write ends every time," he said. "Sometimes we just underline." The bridge held by noon the next day. Men took turns walking across it, slow at first, like it might bite. When the first wagon rolled, people cheered louder than they had for any wedding. The seep trickled on, a small, stubborn echo. Reverend Morton untied the register and opened to the blank baptism and the new birth notice and the marriage line, with the ink still young, where Lydia had signed. He added one more entry in a corner, where margins welcome truth. Inquiry, held in the rain. River kept. Law walked without its badge and did not get lost. He shut the book with a gentleness that surprised no one anymore. Eli cleaned his gun and put it away behind the flour barrel in Mara's kitchen, because doors with babies behind them sometimes need tools near that can do serious work. He wiped the brow of the child with his thumb and laughed when the boy frowned in his sleep, like a judge. "You'll find your name," he said softly. "You'll speak it before any man pins it to you." Tala came to the doorway and leaned against it like a tree at ease. "You are quieter," she said to him. "Inside," he agreed. "Not out. Keep it that way," she said. "Quiet men who know when to be loud are the only kind that last." He tilted his head at her. "You going to stay?" "Until the pools don't need singing," she said, which could be a day or years. Toward evening, Jonah brought the ledger to the porch and set it on his knees. The cover had taken rain and smoke, and now it took a little sun. He drew a careful line under Vickers' partial and left 3 full blanks below. He looked at those blanks longer than at any name. Sometimes empty space is the truest thing we put down, he said. It invites what's next to behave. Mara smiled tiredly. Write one thing for me, she said. Write that the bridge did not fall because women dug in the dark. He did, gladly, and the letters looked happier than the mornings. Eli walked to the river one last time before the judge's wagon pulled out. He stood on the rebuilt span and put his palm flat to the rail. It trembled in a good way, under weight, under work, under water it was meant to carry. Across the flats, a lone rider moved small against the world. The hat brim was low, the shoulders narrow, the horse limped. The rider did not look back. Eli did not call or raise a hand. He had made his choice in the canyon pocket. He would not chase death that had already been offered a room and refused. He would keep his breath for names that had not been written yet. He turned, and in the turning, the town arranged itself around him, without him asking. A woman touched his sleeve and thanked him for not taking her husband's temper personally. A boy asked if he could learn to flick a coin into a bottleneck without breaking glass. A man who had once laughed, mean, now laughed warm and surprised at his own change. Reverend Morton nodded from the church step, with his coat off, collar open. A man who had tied a book shut and found a way to open himself instead. Tala brushed her palm against the rail, and the hum in her throat settled into the wood. Mara stood with the baby and the shawl and the new weight of guardianship, and she looked stronger the more she carried. The ledger, the register, the sealed hospital file. The voice inside the story said once more, a soft thread through the noise of hammers and river. You've seen how they hold and how they lie, and how sometimes they save. If they open again, if a thin place shows where a hand tried to change what happened, you'll know which page to open first.